So now that we are done with the segment on Mr. Philip Chan, now we are going to move on to something I guess that's somewhat related to some of the things that we've been talking about earlier, and that would be Japan's falling birth rates. All right. Now, it came out on the 27th of February. So as of filming this video, that will be yesterday. Okay. That Japan's new birth rates, in short, it has fallen to record lows in 2023. All right. So as you can see here on Reuters, okay, number of babies born in Japan fell for an 8th straight year to a fresh record low in 2023. All right. So number of births fell 5.1% from a year earlier to 758,000 thereabouts. Okay, number of marriages slid 5.9% to 489,000. Okay, the first time in 90 years the number fell below 500,000. So let's put things in perspective. Okay, 90 years ago, that would be 1934. 1934, right when the military government first came up, right? So not only that, out of wedlock births, so that means mothers giving birth without being married, okay, they are very rare in Japan. So a government spokesperson said that the government will take unprecedented steps to cope with the declining birth rate, through things like policy measures like expanding childcare, promoting wage hikes for younger workers, right? And it is important, according to the Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi, right? They basically said the next 6 years or so, when the number of young people will rapidly decline, that will be the last chance to reverse this particular trend. So essentially, Japan is at, when it comes to this issue, is absolutely critical for them now, alright? Because if this goes on, according to this article here, Japan's population will likely decline by 30% to 87 million by 2070, with 4 out of every 10 people aged 65 or older. Oh my gosh, okay? So it's absolutely critical now for Japan to try and stem this particular problem. Okay. Now here's the thing. From an economic standpoint, especially for your econ students, right? And I guess even GP students would know this also. Having your population birth rates decreasing to this level is especially critical. All right, it's not a good thing, because simply put, the falling birth rates, eventually it becomes like a ticking time bomb in a sense, because population rates will decline, and that will also mean you have a smaller workforce, your economy as a whole will shrink. Okay, to put things in perspective, all right, I can't remember when this news came out, but this was a couple of weeks ago. Japan is no longer even the 3rd largest economy in the world. It is currently the 4th largest economy in the world. Alright? So for some perspective, okay, especially for students who don't take H2 history, for the H2 history students, you all will eventually learn about this when you explore Japanese economic history. Japan became the 2nd largest economy in the world in around the 1970s. Alright, and that was following essentially 2 decades of unprecedented growth. Alright, but at this very moment, Japan is no longer number 2. Okay, it is now number 4. So it considered number 2 to China around the 20 teens, I believe. So 2010, 2011, thereabouts. And just this year, the 3rd spot to Germany. Alright, so Germany is now the 3rd largest economy in the world. Okay, as of the current situation, according to the World Economic Forum, okay, Japan's sorry about that. Okay, so according to the World Economic Forum, right, currently, or at least last year, okay, 1 in 10 residents are aged 80 or older. Okay, 1 in 10 residents are aged 80 or older. Okay, so the aging population issue is really very bad in Japan. All right. And of course, other implications of falling birth rates. And you already see this happening in Singapore as well, right? Healthcare costs are going to increase. Welfare programs and, you know, the costs that they bring along with it will also have to increase because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you have seen the budget videos that I made, all right, you would see like the details of all these analysis. But if we want to create, I guess, a sort of like good life, I guess, for the citizens, and indeed it is the government's job to do so. If the population is aging, more investments have to be made into your healthcare infrastructures or your general, you know, things related to quality of life, right? And of course, healthcare costs and healthcare processes related to geriatric care. That means care for taking care of the healthcare needs of the older population. Okay, so all these things will cost money, right? Tax revenues will also decrease. So we are seeing essentially this spiral that's going on right now, right? As the labor pool ages, right, and more of them retire, less of them will pay taxes, and more of them will be on the pension payrolls. So prices will increase, right? And then according to the article, the government said that they're considering wage hikes for younger people, which also means that wages will increase as well. So you get a wage price spiral again, all right? And of course, a lot of investments have to be made to retrain workers, right? Upskill them and all that. And the Japanese government, I think, has dedicated 7.6 billion yen, if I remember correctly, to retraining, kind of like what Singapore is doing, okay, with budget 2024. And again, all these things cost money. So yeah, those are the possible implications here, all right, for Japan, you know, with their aging population. Now, what we need to understand, okay, really would be the causes of all these. Why is it that Japan is facing, you know, an aging population in general? Okay, there are a couple of reasons, and again, for the H2 history students, you would have an advantage here because you do learn about Japan's economic history, and that would provide a lot of context into the understanding of this particular issue right now. But number one, I guess it will be societal pressures. So the culture and the tradition in Japan would be that they essentially dictate that young people would have to go and work hard, alright, take care of their elderly and undergo all these typical rites of passage. But the impacts of that is that young people would be forced essentially into or boxed into this situation where they absolutely have no choice and see no way out. And that's why you see for almost a decade now, or even more than that, the increasing preponderance of the hikikomori issue, where, you know, the Japanese young people would simply, I guess, give up, right? Sort of like the lie flat thing that's happening in China, and I guess to some degree in South Korea as well, all right? And so yeah, that would be a lot of all these pressures, right, would also force young people to turn away from actually going in and contributing to the economy, and therefore you see falling birth rates. I mean, how are you gonna meet somebody and have a kid if you're gonna be holed up at home 24/7, right? That's number one. Number two is the work culture. So in the past, what Japan had in spades, right, would be this concept called lifetime employment. So the idea is that you go in and you work for one of the big firms in a keiretsu, okay? So just think of it as a huge group whereby there are partnerships between a lot of big firms, okay? That's what the keiretsu is, okay? They used to have lifetime employment. So you go in there, get a job, and you work there until you retire, essentially, alright? That's how it was in the past. So the older generation could more easily secure a job when it first started in the 1950s, right? Or to be clear, Keiretsu is not like it was a totally new thing, because in the past there were the Zaibatsus, but we're not going to go into that, okay? But what that also created was a situation of, a lack of, I guess, job opportunities, alright? So even in the 80s, okay, a lot of young people, 80s and 90s, I guess, a lot of young people were already finding it quite difficult to go out there and get a job, simply because a lot of the vacancies were already occupied by all these lifers who work in all these big companies, all your Sarariman and all that. Okay, so the competition is very, very intense, alright? Now that has changed, more or less, at this moment. Companies have already changed that, but the fact of the matter is that the population is still getting older, which also means a lot of the older workers who were lifers in many of these big companies, they have to go out and find a new job, which creates yet more competition for the younger workers, okay, or younger graduates coming out trying to seek employment, okay? At the same time, the work culture in Japan, I mean, I don't really need to expound too much on it, but it's quite infamous for having very, 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 very long working hours. And by very long, I mean very long. That means you go in at maybe, let's say, 7 a.m. and then you are done at 11 p.m. and then afterwards you still have work to do, right? So if young people, not just young people, just Japanese in general, they have to work such long working hours, how are they going to be able to spare the time to start a family? Because their basic quality of life is already undermined in that sense, alright? So if less people are going out there to start families, then it stands to reason that the birth rates will decline, okay? Another reason would also be related to cultural changes pertaining to Japanese women, alright? So Japan, amongst all the developed nations, I suppose, has, I guess, is the most conservative when it comes to, traditional gender roles. So typically, when women go out and work, yes, they can go out and work, but if they were to start a family, get married and start a family, the expectation is that they will give up their full-time employment and become full-time mothers, right? Or full-time housewives, take care of the household and all that. And because the younger generations of Japanese women, right, obviously don't really want that, okay? So what happens is, as they work, they'll focus more on their careers, they'll stay single, and they become increasingly reluctant to get married. And when that happens, they don't get married, they don't have kids, the birth rates fall even more, alright? Not only that, Japan's, or at least in the big cities, okay, the cost of living and healthcare costs, everything, they are all increasing, as I said earlier. And not only that, the government support for, families that give birth to kids, right, it's not all that high. So end up families that require the support to help, take care of their children or maintain the familial structure, they are not as well off, and that creates a lot of stresses. And finally, Japan is very reluctant to open their economy to a lot of foreign labor. Okay? I mean, not to say that they are totally closed off, right? It isn't like how it was during the Tokugawa shogunate, alright? But that being said, it still has quite a huge aversion towards having foreign workers. Even if you naturalize there, the culture there is such that you are ultimately still considered a gaijin, right? So if they are reluctant to bring in foreign labor, alright, then there's a considerable difficulty, I guess, in bridging this particular gap of an aging population. So all these things compounded together would very obviously create a situation whereby Japan would face declining birth rates of such unprecedented scale. Alright? So those are the causes, and the impacts. We have talked about those already. And I guess if we were to compare it to Singapore, alright, Singapore is also facing a similar situation, although the problem is not as acute as Japan, but nevertheless, our population is also getting older. Healthcare costs are also increasing. That's why you see in the budget 2024, the government is investing so much into healthcare and support for the retired and elderly, alright? But at the same time, the difference is that our economy is also very open to a lot of foreign labor. For the young people though, this problem is also going to continue because less and less young people are having children in Singapore. And I will admit, I am one of those statistics, right? I absolutely have no desire whatsoever to have kids, okay? But yeah, in 2023, for instance, for every 1,000 people in Singapore, our birth rates, were about 8.33, thereabouts. I think this stat came from SingStat, okay? So that's why, alright, there's so much investment in, once again, retraining, as you see in the budget video, things related to Skills Future, the $4,000 Skills Future top up, the second bite at the education apple, to quote DPM Wong, okay, having adults be able to go back and get a second diploma, right, and with subsidies and a monthly allowance, okay. So a lot of these problems, right, are very difficult to solve because there are just so many moving parts here. Now, of course, the real question is, how do we use this as an example? So we can use it in this particular question. For instance, it's I guess it's a bit old, certainly, this question, but given that the problem of the aging population is still a very salient one in Singapore, I don't doubt that if the A-levels this year were to set a question on all these social issues, aging population will be right up there. Alright, so an aging workforce is an opportunity, not a burden. Is this true of your society? Okay, so yes and no, obviously, that will be your response, right? It is an opportunity, but it will at the same time create greater burdens. That is just inevitable. And if, let's say, you were to come up with a point that expounds upon why an aging workforce would be a burden on the society as a whole, or at least increase some burdens, right? Then you can bring in the example of Japan, right? Aging workforce also means there is a need to increase healthcare costs, and that without stemming the problem, that can possibly lead to a spiral of even more or even lower birth rates, I guess, right? Because I mean, obviously, as I said earlier, it depends on the workplace culture as well, but many young people might be turned off from the idea of having kids, okay? If the aging workforce is receiving so much more help, young people obviously will find it more difficult to sort of manage, right? And that may in turn, cause more of them to shun starting a family altogether. So yeah, that's how we can use this particular example for this essay question, I suppose. And it is a very salient problem as of this very moment, not just for Japan, but for Singapore as well. So yeah, that's how we would use this. All right. So that will be that for this segment. Okay. So now that we are done with that, we are gonna move on to the next one. So thanks for watching the Discourse Education podcast. All right. If you are interested in asking a question, right, certainly do submit a question here, all right, using this link. If you are interested in H2 history general paper, O levels English, all right, tuition, because ultimately the Discourse Education is a tuition service, do contact us using these details here, our socials, or you can directly contact us using our contact numbers right on the website. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.